Welcome to Module 2. Today we're going to be talking about Chapter 9, Chapter 6, and Chapter 8, and I'm going to go in that order. So it looks like I'm jumping around, but there's a reason why I'm jumping around. So Chapter 9, before we start it, if you'll remember back to Module 1, we talked about 3 different techniques for flat pattern making that we use. So if you want to look at that, it's Chapter 4 and page 20, and there's 3 different techniques. The first one's dart manipulation, the second one is adding fullness, and then the third one is contouring. And today we're going to talk about contouring. I realize I jumped over technique number 2. We're going to be doing that in Module 3. So I feel like contouring is important to get under your belt first because it is all about still working with that dart, whereas added fullness is we're kind of branching away from that further and further, but contouring still directly affects the dart and the shapes that we use to get it to fit the form. So we're going to start with Chapter 9, and to do that I have my dress form right here, and I'm going to change the camera angle really quick and just show you some things on the dress form. If you want to follow along in your book, that the page that you're going to be interested in looking at, just to understand why we care about contouring and what it does, is Chapter 9, page 160. So on page 160, there's a picture of several ladies that have some gapping going on. And that gapping that you see on those pictures is because we've scooped away some of the fabric. So with our typical block on the dress form, I'll change it really quick and then I'll show you. So on the dress form, we've got these, actually you can kind of see it better right here. You can see how there's a little, it scoops out here a little bit. Not a lot, but just enough that if, but it scoops out. So if I put my ruler here, you'll notice I could stick my finger underneath that ruler. So our main basic block that we usually work with goes from the apex of the bust and to this point right here, and there happens to be a gap underneath it. So the fabric that we currently use sort of floats across the surface, going from high point to high point to high point to high point, like, and underneath the bust you can see even more. There's this, and I can totally stick my finger underneath that one. So I can completely stick my finger underneath there. So our main patterns float across the body, just touching those high points. So then, if you have to make something that will have to go down into the lower point, you have to change your pattern a little bit, and that's where contouring comes in. And there's some basic measurements that we can use that are kind of average, that typically work with everyone. You might have to, on a muslin when you're doing a fitting, if it's somebody who's got a larger bust cup size, you might have to do it a little bit extra contouring, but the numbers that I'm going to give you today are pretty good for pretty much everything. I haven't really run into a problem with them from a flat pattern making perspective. One benefit that draping has in this department is that you don't have to do the contouring because you're draping on the form. So if you're going to be going over one of those areas and you have to go down into one of those hollows in the body, the draping takes care of it. So there's that plus for doing draping, but for flat patterning, heck, we can basically do the same thing just with one little tiny shift of the pattern. So that's what I'm going to show you today. And you'll probably go, wow, on Module 1, David should have done some contouring. You're right, I should have. You'll get to the point where I'll say, oh, and here's where I should have contoured on Module 1. I didn't do it on Module 1 because that would have been confusing because you wouldn't have been ready for it yet. But now you'll see why we do it. So I'm going to pull the camera down and I'll give you a whole bunch of stuff. Okay, so if you want to follow along in your book, I am looking at page 161. And when you go to 161, you will see your front bodice piece, as well as your back bodice piece. You're going to find both of them there, and they'll have a whole bunch of other lines drawn on them. Well, I'm going to transfer all of those lines on to this right here. That way you can see where they go, and I can talk about them a little bit better. And then in your book, I might write the information on my pattern here as well, but sometimes it can get confusing. So the first one that I'm going to do actually is number 2. Let me start with number 1 actually. So we'll just go through the numbers. So number 1, the first contouring line that we care about is coming from the neckline and points at the bust point. And there's just a straight line drawn between the two. And now I'm going to give you a number on a full size pattern. So write the full size number on your book, or make a note of it on your pattern that this is for the full size, and then you'll just have to remember to divide it in half when you do this in half size. So I'm going to measure over, on a full size pattern, the distance from the line along the radius of the bust. I'm going to come towards center front 1/4 of an inch on a full size pattern. Because this is half size, I'm coming over here 1/8 of an inch. But on a full size pattern, the distance from here to here will be 1/4 of an inch. And you're going to connect that point up to the point on the neck, as well as to the bust point. So this is 1/4 of an inch in a full size pattern. The next one that you're going to do, you'll notice it comes from the shoulder to the bust point. Straight line, and you're still going to come towards center front. And on a full size pattern, this would be 1/2 inch. You would come 1/2 inch away from where the line intersects the bust radius. You'd come 1/2 inch towards center front on a full size pattern. So on my half size pattern here, I'm only going to be coming over here 1/4 of an inch to maintain the size. But 1/2 inch is what you want to remember for when you're doing a full size pattern. And then you're going to do the same thing. Connect the new point on the bust radius to the shoulder point and down to the bust point. Number 3 is basically at that notch on the armhole. And this is specifically needed for when we're doing strapless stuff. So I'm going to draw a line from the notch to the bust point, and then for a full size pattern, you're going to come down towards the waist 1/4 of an inch. So that's for a full size pattern. For this one that I'm doing here, I'm dividing that in half. So it's 1/8 of an inch. Notice I did not reference the bust radius on this one. This is just a full 1/4 inch on the full pattern from the armhole. 1/8 of an inch on this side one, tiny one, if you want to do it on here. If you just want to mark these on your book so that you don't have to get confused by those lines, you can. I'll leave mine on here just because it's kind of nice to have them on here. The next line that we're going to draw is down here. Number 4 on your book at the bust radius. From each dart leg, you're going to come out 3/8 of an inch. That's at the full size. At a full size, you're coming out 3/8 of an inch. For my half size, I'm only coming out 3/16 of an inch. So 1/8 of an inch plus 1/16. And that happens on both sides. So 3/8 of an inch at full size 3/16 at this half size. We're going to do that same thing, but this, yeah, this actually points all the way to the bust point. Now, they're showing on page, the page that we're on, what is it? Let's see, 161. On 161, they're showing this dart, the point of the dart extending all the way up to the bust point. So just ignore that fact. If you're transferring this onto your pattern, just ignore that and take the contour straight up to the bust point. Number 5, this is coming directly from center front. So I'm going to square over, and what that means is I'm taking a line that's 90 degrees away from center front, straight over to the bust point. And the full dimension that I'm going to create is, I'm going to divide this number in half, is 3/4 of an inch. So 3/8 of this will come below, 3/8 of it will come above. And that 3/8 is for, that full 3/4 of an inch is for the full size. For the half size, I'm going to come down 3/16 and come up 3/16 for the half size, so that between the two of them it equals 3/8 total. And I'm taking that straight over. I'm ignoring the radius on that one. And the final one is, we're coming all the way back up here to number 6, and this is for if you're going to be using like spaghetti straps, is where this one will show up. So they've got a little dotted line that comes from the notch point down to the edge of the bust radius. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to take 7/8 of an inch and center 7/8 of an inch on here. So 7/8 is for the full size, which means that I'm going to take 7/16. I'll probably put I'm going to, just because it's intersecting this other one over here, I'm going to put, and honestly, it doesn't have to center on this. It just has to be, maybe just use that straight line. It just is a general area, so just use the dotted line that you've got going on here till right here, till you get to the bust radius, and then go 7/16 on your small pattern over. Now, the only time that you're really going to use this is you're going to have some pretty really low cut garments if you're going to be entering this realm. So as a general rule, you probably won't even touch this one ever. I have yet to touch this one. The other thing with the 6 is that from this top edge down this line, on a full size pattern, it's 1/8 of an inch. So on this one, it's 1/16 of an inch. So I'm dropping a line down 1/16 of an inch. And this is if your strap, it's going to be more of a strap. So it's going to be something like that. Let me just bring that up there so you can see it a little bit better. So you can go ahead and write all those measurements on here if you want to. I'm not going to say to do it or not, but definitely write those measurements that I just went over. Definitely write them in your book. In fact, I'm kind of a nerd. And I needed this reference, this information at one time where I didn't have access to my book. So I honestly actually keep a picture of this in my phone so that I'm like, oh my goodness, contouring. I need to contour this pattern. Goodness, what is it? Anyhow, I was gone somewhere and I had my family come and find my book and take a picture of it for me. And I've kept that image on my phone ever since then, because sometimes you just gotta know what to contour and when. The next piece that we're going to look at is the back piece. So number 1 on the back, well, I guess they're going by 7. First thing to notice is go up to the shoulders again, and they're just taking a line straight from one part of the shoulder. Oh, actually they're not. It's still 1/8 of an inch. It's that same dimension from the front. So on your pattern, it's a 1/16 of an inch down along the dart legs. So at full size, that's 1/8 of an inch, and then it goes over to the point of the shoulder and to high point shoulder. So you've got it, oops, you've got it right there, just like that. On the small pattern, it's 1/16 of an inch down. On your full size 8, well, these numbers will work for larger and smaller sizes as well. It's going to be a 1/16 on this little pattern. The next thing that we're going to do is go straight up from the dart point to your horizontal balance line right here. That's where you're going to find this point right here. And you don't have to leave this line here, you just need to find that point up on the horizontal balance line. So we're up here on the horizontal balance line, straight up from the dart point. And then you're going to take that point and you're going to take a line straight down and straight down to the 2 different sides of the legs of the dart. And that's it. There's not any official measurement, any of that. Oh, something that didn't have a number on the front, but it's there, and it's there on the back as well, is along the side seam over here. So on the side seam, you've got along the top, that dimension coming in here that they have is 1/2 inch. And that's the same dimension on the front as it is on the back. So on this size, it's going to be 1/4 inch. But this is going to be from one of those strapless numbers that will use this. That's the only time we're going to use it, is if it's strapless. And that is it. That is the basic numbers that you are going to find for contouring. Now, just a note, these numbers stay the same for all sizes, but they might change depending on cup size. So this is for a B cup. I might have said something a little bit different earlier where I was like, oh, but this is for all sizes, but not different cup sizes. Okay, I'm gonna pause the video and I'm gonna go and I'm gonna ink all of these in so that I don't accidentally erase them sometime, and then I'll come right back. All right, I have made several, I've transferred over several so that you don't have to watch me trace them out. Notice that when I transferred it over, I didn't transfer all of the contour lines. I just still transferred everything like normal. I don't transfer more lines than I need. And ultimately, I'm just gonna make up a design here as I go. And it's nice to have the contour lines on my initial block so that if I do happen to need a contour line, I can go, oh, I'm reminded that they're here, and then I can reference it really quick. But I'm not gonna, they're just reminding me where they go and that they exist. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a quick, let's just have a plunging neckline, shall we? And I'm gonna show you how to use the contour to make it so that you can design stuff that fits instead of have it flop around at the neck or at the armhole. So what I'm gonna do is have a plunging neckline that comes from where the notch is about. Just down like that. So it's going below where like the nipple will be. So that's pretty plunging. I'm going to always try as I design whenever it comes to a seam. If I can make it 90 degrees to the seam, I try to for at least ½ inch. It doesn't have to be, but I try to. It makes it easier to sew stuff together later. So I've got that one, and that's going to go through several contours. So if I put this down, I drew from here down to here, which means I crossed this contour and I crossed this contour, which means it's going to be flappy. So I've got to do something about that. But I'm just going to draw in a quick line to remind myself that I have to do it. And it's going to be that it's this much will need to come off because of where that is going through. On this one, we'll have a lot more. Notice that I'm just marking off basically those contours that I already did once. Now let's do the armhole as well. So I'm just going to have it drop down a little bit. I don't like that. That's better. You can use a French curve for this if you want, whatever you want, but I was just feeling like the curve wasn't just right. Now, you'll notice that I mentioned that the contour that comes from the underarm is related to strapless garments. So I'm not going to worry about this one. However, the one coming up here to the shoulder doesn't have to do with strapless. So it's affected by this contour. So suddenly, I have a lot more work to do. And that's okay. It'll ultimately be a better garment. So if I need to get rid of this material somehow so that it's not flappy, the question is, where does it go? Well, I have this lovely big opening down here. So all I'm going to do is transfer it over to the dart. I'm just going to leave the dart open the entire time. I'm not going to tape it down after I'm done doing one because I've got 3. So I'm going to take it and I'm just going to take one line and match it up with the other. I just closed it right here. That's all I did. Because I don't like a whole bunch of extra drawing everywhere, I'm going to erase some of my style line so that it's cleaner looking. just so I'll fill that back in. I don't want to have a lot of pencil marks underneath tape, because then you can never erase them and it's annoying. Okay, so I've taped that one in place, and now I can come back and I can blend between my lines, my style lines, and I'm good to go. And this is now the correct shape, so it won't flap at this point right here. But guess what? It's still going to flap around between the boobs, and we don't want to do that. We want it to be nice and clean. So I'm going to cut along one of those lines, one of those outside lines. And it's going to need to go pivot all the way down there. It pivots quite a ways on this one, and that's okay. I'm going to clean stuff up. Tape that down and then blend between those lines. This is when it's nice to have curves, because it did appear to be a straight line on your pattern, and it will appear to be a straight line when someone wears it, but in the actual, when I started it was kind of a straight line, but for contouring it ends up being a curved line, something like that. But when it is on the body, that will appear to be straight. Now, if you're done with this part of it, you can come back in and add your seam allowance if you want. So I'm just going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way along here. And I can still, this is center front, I could still have this on a fold. So I'm going to have that on a fold. It'll just be a fold with a plunging neckline. Okay. So when it's all done, there we go. All of that disappeared into the dart. So look how much extra large this dart is. It's getting pretty big. That's to be expected. So now I'm going to stabilize a little bit more of these ones that I've already done before I go and hack in to the other side. Make sure you come back and say that these lines aren't important anymore. Otherwise, people will wonder what they are. Oftentimes, before you send something off to get graded and digitized, you'll transfer the pattern over to a brand new, fresh piece of paper so that you don't have all of these excess little marks on them when it goes to somebody else. But that's not always the case. Final one that I have to take care of is this armhole. And notice, like, I have marked it down here all the way to this, this bust radius. I'm not coming over, just because it crossed this line, doesn't mean I'm coming all the way over like this. It's only telling me that where this line crosses, this little piece of information right here, that needs to go away. At this point, it doesn't mean that the full dimension that we first marked needs to go away. It's just this amount right there. close that up till it matches. When I've erased it, I've only erased it enough that I can still see where the line's supposed to line up. And now I'm going to grab my French curve. And blend between those lines. Now this one is done as well. And I can add my seam allowance to it. Oh, but you know what's interesting? Before I cut it off, I had another contour here. I came from the notch right here. And at the notch, it was supposed to come down 1/16 of an inch. So I'm going to change the shape there too. So yeah, there was even an extra piece of contouring that I nearly forgot. Contouring is easy to forget that it's required for a good fitting pattern, because if you've got your regular block and you just trace it off and you're good to go and I did everything I was supposed to, right? Well, contouring can easily be forgotten. A lot of schools don't even necessarily talk about contouring. So don't be the person that has floppy garments because you forgot to contour. Now, this is fine, but I could fill in this dart, and now my dart comes from here all the way to here. That is huge. If I did want a dart that big, I would turn it into seam allowances. But what I might also do is say, you know what? I'm gonna take some of this and make it into a side dart. And I'd split this dart into 2 different places so that you don't have such a huge dart. When darts get this big, then you start risking it becoming pointy at the bust point again. So at that point, consider in the design opening up the dart to some other place. If you have a client ever that has a design like this with a dart down here, encourage them to do something else as well. Something else we could do is, no, I'll show you that on another piece over here. But yeah, I would probably, personally, I would say, we need to take this over to a side dart. That's actually a bit high, I don't like that. Let's have it start low. As a general rule, darts coming from the side seam, if they point up, it tends to be more flattering. If you ever have them up here pointing down at the bust, then it kind of encourages people to think saggy bosom. So probably don't have darts point down because people will think it looks a little bit saggy. And we don't want that. So I would probably, see, there's where the original dart was. This is how much we took out from all of the contouring. So I'd probably make it even smaller, the base dart down here, and have half of it go into the side dart. Nope, I didn't cut off enough. I'm going to show truing a dart again on this, just so that for those of you who it's being hard to true a dart, you'll know how to do it. I'm going to come in, and because these darts are still fairly sizable, I'm going to back them off from the bust point. I think I'm going to back it off a full inch. We'll do 3/4 of an inch. I'm going to do the same amount of backing off over here. You might still hear my nephew out, some of my nieces and nephews outside laughing their heads off. So if you do, I apologize for the extra noise, but I'm not going to tell them to stop having fun. I'm coming to the center, the leg of this dart closest to center front. Coming to the other side, so I've got both of them going to the dart point, not the bust point, the dart point. I can close the dart. Add my seam allowance. Sometimes you'll notice in this process that your dart legs don't line up as much as they did when you first started. That's okay, this is your opportunity to true that up and make it good again. And there we go. There's one dart point. Something that I didn't talk a lot about last time that we still need to do is notches are important. So I've got my bust point up here. For sewing, come down this center line a 1/2 inch at a full size. So I'm going to do it at a 1/4 inch on here and just make a little drill point. That's what they will use to market in the industry, is a little drill. So I'll just put a point just back from the point of the dart. And then also give yourself a notch at the bottom of each dart leg. So ultimately, when I take this to sew it, all I'm going to do is mark this point here that's backed off from the dart point, not the bust point, from the dart point, 1/2 inch, and these 2 notches, and I'll have sufficient information to sew my dart. I'll do the same thing on the side dart. I'm going to take the lower dart leg, and fold that up to the dart point. And fold my dart and close my dart. As a general rule, if you can design, well, I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second when we move to the next part. I've opened it up on the side. My side seam is no longer straight. So just like I talked about in module 1, I'm going to straighten my side seam here. Add my seam allowance. Open it up. Notch the ends of my dart. legs. And there I have a sleeveless, strappy, deep plunging neckline bodice front with no seam line at the center front with 2 darts, one at the side seam and one at the waist. And yeah, that's how you use the contouring lines. They disappear into the darts. That's where they go. Or you can have them disappear and you could ease them in someplace. You could actually choose to do that. You could have left all of this alone, not take these out, and you could have turned them into little gathers along this side if you wanted to. But they need to be taken care of if you don't want it to be blousy and flappy. On our bodice front, you'll notice these ones down here. This shows up when we are using an empire waist. So let's just do an empire waist really quick. Yeah, let's do an empire waist. So whenever we draw a design line that goes over a dart, we always want to close the dart first. If I don't, it'll lead to some funky stuff, and I'll show that further today as well. But basically, if I want to have, oh gosh, where's my, let me grab something and draw a picture. Let's say I want to have, I'll zoom it in a little bit after I, okay. So here I have my little tiny sketch. Here's the bottom of the bust radius. That's good to know if you're going to do an empire waist, because I don't want to stick the empire waist up here on the boob. That'll chop people's boobs weird, and that's not going to be happy. So if I do an empire waist, and I just want it to swoop up from here to the center. So if I want to just go straight across, that's not going to interfere with a dart too much. And I could maybe draw it across the dart, but as a general rule, still close your dart when you draw the design line. So let's say I want this kind of number going on. And then I'm just going to take this and turn the rest of this into gathers. This dart, by the end, the dart will be completely gone. And then let's just have it plunge down to about the level of the bust line again. Okay? But I'll have I'm not going to take the sleeves in any extra. It'll just be something like that. So when it's all done, we have that, and on the back side it would look like that. So we're seeing the back from the front right there. So I'll do this really quick, and it'll show you how to use the contour for the empire waist. And it'll review the gathers a little bit. So I've got the plunging neckline that comes down to level with the bust. And actually, you know what? I don't want to do level with the bust. I don't want to do this contour right here. I'm going to take it up just a little bit. If I take it up by 3/8 of an inch on a full size, I have avoided that contour. It's still a plunging, well, not plunging, it's still a fairly deep neckline. Oh, let me back it up. Okay. Sorry. So I didn't even go all the way to the notch over here, but while we're up here, let me just point that at the notch, it had to come down 1/16 of an inch. So if I draw from my neckline down to the 1/16 of an inch, I'm not taking away quite a 1/16 of an inch in height there, but I have to take out some, according to the contour on the shoulder. Okay, so I got that one. The other one I have to remember is I have this contour coming up here to the neckline. That was a 1/4 inch there at full size. It's a 1/8 of an inch here. So I do need to take this out. I avoided the one at center front by raising my neckline just a titch. So I still have those contours to worry about. I'll worry about that in just a second. I do have to worry about this contour down here. So I'm just going to draw it on right away because I know I'm going to have to. And I'm going to have, when I close the dart this time, because I know that I have to do contouring, I'm not going to close my dart according to the original dart leg. I'm going to close it according to these two outside contoured lines. And when I fold it this time, you'll notice I'm not going to fold all the way to the bust point, because if I follow this line all the way up, it hits a point all the way up here. So I mean, I could put that point in just for my folding, but it could get confusing as well. So this time it doesn't really matter which leg I fold first. Probably still fold according to closest to center front, just so that you don't have any confusion for yourself. But I'm going to close that dart leg before I draw my empire waist. So now I'm going to come in here and look at my picture and say, all right, well, the bust points were about here. I'll fix my image here. It scoops in just above the bust point. So that's probably about 3 inches when I blow it up to scale, which means it's about 1.5 inches here. So I'm going to take it a little higher. I'm going to make sure that I miss the bust circle when I'm drawing this line. Otherwise, you will start putting the empire waist onto the bust, and we don't want that. So it's nice that I had the bust circle drawn there, because otherwise I might have accidentally put that too high. Now that that is in place, I can, actually I'm just going to tape it in place, because that's where I want it. And I'm going to cut along that line, because these are going to be two different pieces now. So here I can get rid of this line. This was my old dart. I'm getting rid of that. Here's my center front, and I can put it on a fold. I'd come back in and I would tape on new seam allowances right along here. Right here I'd put on new seam allowances. I don't need seam allowance on the front. I also am one of those people who's like, oh man, look at all of this extra paper flapping around back here. I cut all that extra paper off just because I like my patterns to be neat. And there we go. So now back to this piece. I need to finish the contour, and I need to do some gathers here for this dart. And all I'm gonna do is slash down the contour, slash open the dart. Notice I didn't even go down the dart leg, I just went to the center of the dart. You can do that, that's okay too. Close the contour, tape that into place, and it opened up into this little dart area. I can add my seam allowance for center front. Oh, I need to blend center front first, because remember, it now no longer lines up because of that contour. So go ahead and get the blend between the old line and the new line. Mark out the old lines that you don't need. I realize that some of you might be like, oh my goodness, David, why are you showing this again? Some of you will actually be glad to see me go through all of this, just as a reminder to get it into your head, all of the little different processes that have to occur to finish the pattern up. This can still be on center front, and it can still be on a fold. Well, of course, I mean, it's not still on center front. It's always going to be center front, but it can still be a fold is what I mean. I'll just add seam allowance here on the side. I'll add seam allowance there too. Okay. Right here, we need to add gathers. And I need to add some seam allowance. So just to have something to work with seam allowance as well as the gathers, I'm just going to add on a large enough piece of paper that I have something to work with. Some of my dog's hair got in the pattern piece right there. All right. And this all of these lines I don't need anymore. And I'm just going to come out from the dart leg, which happens to actually be the new contour line right here. I'm going to come out from that, 1/2 inch on each side, so 1/4 inch on the quarter size pattern, or I can come out wider. I can come all the way out here if I want to, and just really spread out the gathers. That could actually be really nice to just really spread those gathers out. On one side it looks like it's about 1.5 inches, the other side it's about 2 inches, so at the middle here it should be about 1.75 inches. To really blend that through. Notice I'm kind of fudging this edge a little bit. That's okay. It's going into gathers. If it was a pleat, I would be a lot more exact. But since it's gathers, I'm going to be a little bit more open to the concept that it can vary a little bit. I'm going to draw a bracket between there and say gather to, well, I need to figure out how to gather it to something. So I'm going to bring this pattern piece back and find out where this notch hits. So I've come from the side seam up to the first notch where it's going to start gathering. And then I can come to the other side and line up my center fronts and find out where this notch is going to hit. So now on this piece, I have two little notches, and between here, it's going to be gathered. I'm not gathering on this piece, but the gathers on this other piece up here will happen between these 2 points. So now I can measure this, and this is 1 5/8 inches at this half size. So I'll just keep it true to this. So this is going to gather to 1 5/8 inches. 1 5/8 of an inch. I'm just going to mark that in here. And so it's going to take it from 2 3/4 of an inch and get scrunched down to 1 5/8 of an inch and then get sewn onto this piece. All right, so I have my two pieces here. Let's just pretend that I finished the armhole there and that I put seam allowance here. I still have to label them. At this point, on your label, start giving yourself a pattern piece number. So I've got, this is a bodice front, and I've got an 8. So, well, it's size 8, and I need one of these because this is on a fold, and I'm going to call this number 1. Now this one I need to give it a different name. It can't be bodice front because that's the same name as that. So this one, I'm just going to call this the Empire. Empire waist is going to be this piece. It's size 8. I need only one of it because of the center front, and I'm going to make this piece number 2. And I'm done. All right, from module 1, I hope you guys remember this piece. I'm not going to actually go in and contour this, but let's talk about where I should have contoured on it. I should have contoured, if we look at this, I should have done some contouring here, which means I should have done some contouring here. I made this narrower, so I should have done some contouring here. I definitely should have done some contouring here. Because it was strapless on this side, I should have done maybe a little bit of the strapless one here. Because there's no sleeves on it, on this bodice front one. I didn't mention this earlier, but this is really, this assumes that you're going to put a sleeve in on the side seam, this part right here. If you're not going to have a sleeve, then you might want to take that in just so it doesn't flap around the arm. So honestly, there's no sleeves going on, so I should have taken it in here and here. That's it. So I missed an, oh, and up here, I should have taken some in up there. That's about it. I didn't need to take it in anywhere else, but there was a lot of contouring that should have gone into this piece that didn't. I didn't do it because it would have just been confusing for you. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and use it as the opportunity to show you what I would need to do the back. So we'll do the contouring that's necessary on the back. Maybe that lighting will be, okay, it was, there we go. Okay. I'm going to back out a little bit on this one. Okay. So I'll use the opportunity to show you on the back the contouring that needs to happen. So I have this line drawn here that you can transfer over from your back piece. I didn't put the full contour in but I did put the mark where it goes to. So here's where the mark is on it. I did put that mark on that line, just so I know if I pass through that area that I'm going to need to do it. So if this is the front piece, I can't just put the shoulder over here, because guess what? Then I'll be designing it for the wrong side of the body. So this is for the right side. This strap comes up and goes on the right side of the body. I know when I'm looking at it, it looks like the left, but this is for the right side of the body, which means this is the right side of the back. So I'm not going to do this side. I'm going to do this side over here. Let's go ahead and sketch out what I want to do to the back. I know that it's going to need to come from over here. And I know that it's going to need to scoop down like this to match up with the front. And it's going to need to scoop out here. I don't want to have the dart up here. I'm going to have to find some way to get rid of it. Currently, I still have the dart down here. I might turn it into a pleat. Yeah, I'll turn it into pleat. And this dart over here, I'll just get rid of it. So, let's get started. So I'm starting on this side. I need to make sure that I get the correct dimension on the shoulder to match up with this one. I believe, I'm just going to double check what I did on the front. I believe that on the front, I centered it on the notch. So I will center this on the dart. And this is 7/8 of an inch wide. So 7/16 on this side, 7/16 on this side. I know that this is going to sweep through here, but I don't want to have to blend this line. So I'm just going to draw in on this side the contouring that needs to have happen. And I'm going to close this as though it was a dart. Oh, before I do that, I'm just going to take this piece and figure out, oh, I just went straight to here. Okay, that's nice. I do want to take in this part right here. So this is no longer valid for contouring. I want to do the same thing over here. So that's no longer valid. And I can just draw this one in the way that I want it to go. Yeah, I just went to the full size. So there's that. And I'm going to close this dart just so that I can draw my line, my design line. We, as a general rule, always want to close the dart. I'm going to say that lots today. But anytime we close, whenever we have a design line that goes over the top of where a dart is, you must close the dart before you draw the design line. So I'm closing the dart here. And I'm actually, while I do this design line, I'm actually going to tape this dart down. so that I can open it up. And I'm going to draw from here, and it needs to come down over the dart into this underarm. Notice how it went. I'm not going through the point of the dart. The point of the dart was actually down here. So when I said close the dart, I actually meant close the contour. I treated it as though it was a dart, but I closed the contour all the way up to here. I don't always close the contour when I'm doing this, but in this case, I could treat it like a dart, so I decided to do it that way. And now, all I have to do is add my seam allowance. And if I wanted to have that line there where the dart was, I could certainly sew it, but because I did a design line right through the middle of it, I don't actually need to have that design line, that dart there anymore. I can just get rid of it. So we'll cut over the top of that. And now I can get rid of this dart. So that dart's gone. So now we can focus on this other side. And on my picture, if we go back to this picture, I don't want the dart up here. So I'm going to just transfer that down into this dart. I'm going to slash both darts open. And now I can close this. So I just closed it, but oh my goodness, look how much went away. I don't know that I like that. Well, I did do this on purpose, by the way. I'm not just making a mistake right now. I did it on purpose to say, oh my goodness, you might run into a moment where you go, ooh, one of the things I'm about to do is going to make myself an issue. So I need to get rid of that dart somehow. How do I do it? Well, the back neck dart, the back shoulder dart, I could simply break a rule. Oh my goodness. I'm just going to straighten the line between there, which happened to lower it the amount that I needed it for, lowered for the contouring on the shoulder. And then I'm just going to remeasure it. And bring it in to be the 7/8. And I took half the dart and I brought it in from the side over here, and half the dart and took it in over here. So it's not an official rule break, but I didn't actually go in and slash the dart and move it someplace else. I just moved it in from the edge the same amount as the dart. So I'm not really going to be that concerned about it. It's a small enough band, you're not going to see a whole bunch of shaping issues, so that's how you do it. Then I would go down here and finish this one. I'd probably turn it into a pleat to match the one on the front, so I would have a little arrow drawn between the two legs to say, take this side and bring it to this side. I would finish all the seam allowances, chop it out, and it would match my other pattern piece. And these two could get sewn together. Okay, we're going to move on to chapter 6. That's chapter 9. Chapter 6 is pretty easy. It's basically this idea of working with style lines. So I've talked about fitting devices in the past. The dart's your main one, and then after the dart, for controlling shape, the dart is the main one, and then you've got your gathers, and then you've got your pleats, and there's one other one that you can do, and that is called style lines, and that's where you basically are getting rid of the darts and you're putting them into a seam someplace else. Okay, so it's pretty easy to do that. On page 122 on chapter 6, they are showing you the basic princess, and then they're going to go in with a little bit more detail and show you how to do that. They, you will notice, use a 2-dart approach. But as you go down, you'll notice, like at page 124, you'll notice they're cutting a lot of corners. And this sort of going out in the middle and just moving stuff randomly. We don't need to do that. Just start without the side seam, the side dart, and you'll be fine. So let's say I want to take this dart and I want to make this into a princess. Well, I can take this line, I can just decide from the bust point where I want it to go. I could have it come to the shoulder. So now I have a princess section here and a front princess section. Or I could have it come from the bust point and come over to the side seam. I can blend that out. And I can have a side panel here and a front panel here. I can go farther up. Probably I'd go farther up. This one is a really sharp angle. It might make the chest look a little bit dubious. You could have it come over here to the front. Technically that would still be a style line and using the princess seam concept. So basically all we're going to do, I'm going to do it for the shoulder. All we're going to do is blend between these two. And notice I'm going through the bust point right now. I'm not paying attention to this dart leg because it was backed off. So really this shape is going to the bust point, so I can do this without concern. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to blend and just round this corner off like that. The one thing I need to make sure now that I do is I need to measure this line that I drew on the front, the line that goes to the front dart leg, and that's 8.5 inches on this side. I need to make sure that it's the same dimension going down the other leg, and it's not quite the same. It's 8 3/8 because I took a little bit of the length away here because I took it into a curve. So I just chalked on 1/8 of an inch down at the bottom so that it's the exact same dimension as the other side. And I blend between the two of those. All I have to do now while it's still in this form, you might want to go from the bust point and mark a notch about 1 inch up and mark a notch 1 inch down on each side for sewing purposes. I think they overcomplicate it in the book, honestly, is what I'm saying. It doesn't need to be that hard. There you go. That's how you transform the dart into a princess seam. I do need to figure out my grain line still. So on the front piece, I can say here's center front, and I can make that on a fold, so that still works. On this side piece, I don't want to have it still match this old grain line. That's kind of a weird, funky, arbitrary. It's not exactly the best. This is one of the reasons why they might have chosen the 2-dart method, but basically what I would do if it were me And I know some people will call me out and say, that's not how you do it. I'm going to take this line down here at the waist, and I'm basically going to, if it's a curved line, I might just draw a straight line between the 2 points to help me find my grain line, and I would square up from that line, and I would have this be my grain line. Now at this point, you just say bodice front and side, and bodice side. I am sure there are other official terms for it, but as long as it's clear what you're talking about, people don't really care in the long run. Some people will get all up in arms about it, but they just need to take a chill pill. So, yep, it should be able to walk just like that and have it totally match up at the other side of it. There you go. That is how you do the princess shaping. And I could have taken this from the bust point anywhere else, and it would have worked just fine. Sometimes people like to slash this and spread it just a little bit so that this can get eased onto here for a little bit more shape around the bosom. I find that I don't ever really need to do that. The other thing that they do show in the book is that down here underneath the chest, they scoop out a little bit on either side. That's a good technique. It just makes it contour. It contours a little bit. Notice it kind of hits those contouring lines when you scoop those out. So if you want to contour and scoop it under the level of the bust a little bit, you certainly can do that. It's not always required, but if you want that really close fit, you can use the contour line to help that scoop underneath there. So do look at the book where that's concerned. They do a pretty good job on that with the shaping. That's going to be on page 123, figure 4. They talk about taking it from midway down here, not up in the bust curve. They talk about it down in this space, about going out 1/8 of an inch here and out 1/8 of an inch here, and just scooping it in to be 1/8 of an inch. That's a good technique. It's kind of a random number that they've thrown at it, but if you really wanted to scoop in there really well, go back to your contouring numbers and use those. So I'm looking through the book right now, just because there's a couple quick and dirty things that I'm gonna warn you away from in this section. We're still in chapter 6. Before I show you some of the quick and dirty stuff to avoid, on page 125, if you go to that page, you'll see design 1, design 2, design 3. All of those designs, they all use that method that I just showed you. They all just took the dart and turned it into a seam. And that just means that you go to the bust point, draw a line where you want it, and then cut the two pieces apart, right down the middle, right off the dart. And then the dart doesn't need to be there anymore. So on chapter 6, 126, they go in and show you the armhole princess style line. They're still using that 2 dart method, and they pivot it out, and you can see how it's just really kind of a quick and dirty method on figure 3 to figure 4 there on 127. It's kind of quick and dirty. They've got this extra thing that closes up, and they put these random X's, and like it's unnecessary. Just use your single dart block and draw it where you want to go. On the back, they show you how to use they close that shoulder dart, and they send it over to the arm and blend it down and take all of that. I have in my original book from when I first learned from a professional tailor, I have in my first book, here I'll just turn the camera on me really quick as I'm talking about this. I have in my original book that those are just quick and dirty ignore methods. So probably the way that I would take care of that instead, the dart on the back shoulder, this one on the panel, this dart right here on this small piece is actually kind of a big dart. This is actually almost at the top, almost the full size of the dart that I have at the full size, because the dart is a 1/2 inch dart at the full size. And honestly, you can just take that and ease it in when you're sewing it. And by easing it in, you're just going to use an easing stitch and just tug it, start it as though you're going to gather it, but you don't pull it till the point that it starts gathering. You just pull it until it condenses those fibers at the edge of the shoulder, and it's fine. That will fit better and still have that dart shape built in up there at the shoulder. Than by doing what they do here on figure 5. So figure 5 on page 127. I just don't like 127. Page 127, there's too much quick and dirty going on. Don't do it. It's not good. Yeah, I would use easing, and then I would just treat that back dart going into the armhole. I would just draw it from the dart, blend it over the arm, draw it over to the armhole, cut them apart, and add seam allowances, and you're good. If there's any sharp edges, you can smooth those out, and then just make sure that the two pieces still walk together well, and have the exact same measurement. But other than that, the rest of it seems pretty quick and dirty to me. I do like chapter 6, 128, page 128. They have some other design lines that show up that are kind of fun. Just look at some of these pictures. They're really cool. Design 5, you look at that and how angular it is, and all they are doing is taking the darts and just chopping them apart and turning it into a seam line. That's all they're doing. So now we're going to get into the panel style line. And the panel style line, I'm actually not going to show you this because I kind of did it earlier with the Empire waist when I was in the contouring mode. You'll notice on 129, figure 1, I would have, actually no, I am going to show you what I would do here, because, well, they're using the 2 dart bodice. I still like starting with the single dart, and I would have just drawn that side style line first with a single dart, and then I would have slashed and opened up the dart into that other space, as though I was just doing a simple dart transfer. They did an extra step here where they actually had to tape those 2 pieces together and figure out how to draw through the dart, and I don't think that's necessary. So choose your dart, choose your block that you're going to use, choose this wisely so that you don't have to do extra work. They've done extra work here that they don't need to do. Yeah, all I would do here, I'll pull the camera down really quick. So for the thing that they show you when they're doing the panel on this side, I would use this block instead. This right here is what I would use. Back it out just a little bit, there we are. Okay. So here they have this side panel going up, just like this. And all I would do, instead of what they did, is it's all done. The panel's done. I can cut this apart right here, add seam allowance to this, and it can sew together with this perfectly right now. That's all I have to do. Add seam allowances, they sew together, we're good. This piece right here, if I want to get rid of the dart, fine, let's put the dart over here. That's where I'm going to have the dart go. Notice I didn't draw lines and everything. Usually I draw lines. I'm just going to get rid of a lot of this excess dart right now. Close this dart up. Tape it closed. And then I opened the dart up into that space. So yeah, I feel like they overcomplicated it when they didn't need to. So there's some good things in the book, and I think that some of the biggest things about this book that I really love is they just show lots of pictures and possibilities, and then go with the most straightforward method of doing it. Don't necessarily, make sure you choose the block that's going to give you the least amount of work. Yeah, so page 131, look at that. Design 1, design 2, design 3, design 4, all of those literally was going through the bust point and chopping it apart. On design 3, they chop it apart and close the darts down below, get rid of them down below on those design lines, and you can see a little bit of a dart in that center section. And that's all about just cutting your pieces apart, getting rid of as much of the dart as you possibly can, and having it disappear into seam lines, and you're good to go. So like design 1, that method that I just showed you and what they did, instead of turning that into a dart that goes into that side panel, they simply gather it. That's it. That's all they did. You could have pleated it there and it would have worked just fine. On design 2, all of the darts, they've gone through the bust point, or they've done the panel, and then they've moved the darts all the way up into the neckline and just turned them all into gathers. That's all they've done. Moved the dart to the neckline, turned it into gathers, and I would argue that on design 2 they did some added fullness as well, but we'll talk about that in module 3. But yeah, there's a lot that you can just do by simply taking the point of the dart, taking it through the bust point, and going someplace else with it, and it's good. Now we're going to look at chapter 8. Chapter 8 is about yokes, flanges, pin tucks, and pleat tucks. I argue that the flanges and the pleat tucks and some of those pin tucks show up with added fullness, so we're not going to talk about those right now. You'll get the concept of how to do those once we talk about added fullness in module 3. So honestly, chapter 8 and chapter 7 should kind of been combined a little bit. Yeah. But on chapter 8, the main thing that I want to talk about is the yoke. And the yoke is basically just a style line. What we just talked about in chapter 6, it's the yoke. The yoke is doing just that. It's taking the darts and putting it into a style line, and honestly, it's kind of like just a horizontal panel. So on the back of a men's tailored dress shirt, you're going to see that yoke. If you go to page 145, they show you how to do yokes for the bodice on the front, where they just draw a horizontal line and then they move all the darts in and gather them. Like, that's all they do. Same thing that we just did with the panels. So there are two different methods of doing a yoke on the back that I do want to talk about, and I'm going to bring you down and I'll actually show you for the bodice back how to do the yoke on the bodice back. And I feel there's two different methods. One you'll see a little bit more in women's wear, and one that you'll see a little bit more in men's wear. There's some quick and dirty methods that they do, like 147, figure 5, they're like, at point B, they're like, ooh, trim, right here, this is where you trim. You don't need to do that. So some of those extra things you won't need to do. Let me just pull the camera down and I will show you how to do the back yoke. Before I do pull the panel down, the camera down, actually, you know what? We're going to cover that in added fullness in module 3. Just focus on transferring your darts into design lines, or just creating new design lines and having darts disappear into those, either as pleats or gathers or anything that you want. But the minute that they're slashing stuff open and spreading and putting in lots of extra paper and fullness where it wasn't before, and isn't connected directly to a dart, that's module 3. So don't do that quite yet. All right, so I have my bodice back, And what we're going to be doing is yokes. So I'm going to show you one method with just the slash and separate. You could do all of this with the pivot as well. I can show you both. So if this is just a typical tailored shirt, I can leave this dart down here, but you know what? Sometimes I can just say, I don't want it to be fitted. So I'm just going to blend through there and let it be a little bit blousier down there. So I'm just going to get rid of that. So now let's get rid of this dart up here and put it into a seam line, into a yoke. So I could have gone according to that line right here, a quarter of the way down the back. That is on your pattern right here. That seems pretty low for like a tailored, for like a men's button down or anything like that, or even a woman's button down shirt. So I would actually bring this up a little bit. You can go that far down if you want. It doesn't really matter. You could have it be all shapely, like you could have it be one of these numbers. One of those numbers right there. I keep on working too far over. Sorry about that. Yeah, oftentimes they have it too far. Like, this is all the way down here. It could be up here and it'd be just fine. Doesn't really matter. You can put it wherever you want. You can make it whatever shape you want. I'm just going to show you two methods to get that straight across yoke. First method, I'm just going to take the point and connect it. I'm going to go straight through the point to connect it. From here, I'm going to go straight through. And then all I have to do is chop along one of the legs right here. And that leg right there, close the dart. Cut these two apart. And I have a yoke. I just have to add my seam allowances everywhere and in between here, and they're good. So now this is something that you'll often see like on a woman's outfit, where the yoke comes along and then goes up. See how the dart goes up, and it stays perfectly straight across here on the bottom part of the shirt. Well, you'll see that on women's, but if you use a striped fabric, it's gonna disappear off the edge into the curve right there. I don't know if you can see that. The grain line will just, the design of the fabric will go off and disappear into this curve. So you might see this in women's wear where it's just like a blousey top. It's not, and it's like silky and there's no pattern on it. You might see that, but the minute that you develop stripes and they start going off the edge like that, we don't want to do this method. This method works fine, but it makes it curve up. And sometimes I would actually rather the yoke stay perfectly straight from here all the way to the armhole. And then with this method, it takes it and brings it up. So the yoke has the curve on it instead of the shirt having the curve on it. So how do I do that? So that I have a perfectly straight yoke. I mean, I suppose, oh, I'm going to just leave that straight across there on the bottom. I'm not even going to draw the dart in because I don't want it. So let's say I want the yoke to come straight across here, but I want this line to remain straight down here. Well, in that case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw straight from my dart, and I'm just going to draw down. And then I'm going to, from that line, I'm going to square over from center back over here, which is on a fold. I'm going to square over, and instead of continuing to draw, I'm going to stop at the line where the dart intersects. I'm going to stop at that line. I can get rid of the extra little lines around here. And instead of slashing to the armhole, I'm going to slash to the back, and then I'm going to take this entire piece here and close the dart. Now I need to continue the line that I started drawing straight across. I'm going to line up my ruler, and I'm going to finish drawing it over to the armhole. So the dart ended up coming towards center back. And now, when I cut these two apart, my yoke has the perfectly straight line, and my back piece down below, it comes across and curves down. And that's okay, because usually our stripes go vertical and we're not going to even notice that it curves down, but we'll still have the shape that it provided because of the dart. And that is how you do a yoke. And that's it for today. Have a great week. See you in class.